Picture this. The year is 1944, Normandy, France. A young American soldier, 19 years old, maybe 20, is pressed against the shattered stone wall of a French farmhouse. The world around him is a living hell. Rifles cracking, machine guns chewing through the air, men shouting in English and German, and pure animal terror. He raises his M1 Garand, fires once, twice, 7 rounds downrange into the chaos. His 8th shot bucks against his shoulder, and then it happens. Ping. A sharp metallic ring cuts through the noise. The empty en-bloc clip launches out of the receiver and tumbles to the cobblestones. The bolt locks open. He is, for one heartbeat, out of ammunition. And according to one of the most persistent legends in all of military history, that sound was a death sentence. The story goes like this. German soldiers and Japanese fighters were trained to listen for the distinctive ping of the M1 Garand's clip ejecting. The moment they heard it, they knew an American rifleman was empty, and they would rush him before he could reload. A single metallic sound announcing to every enemy in earshot, "I'm defenseless. Come and get me." For decades, this legend has lived in books, in documentaries, in internet forums, in the conversations of veterans and collectors and history lovers. It has been repeated with authority and accepted as fact. The ping myth has become as much a part of the M1 Garand's identity as its power, its reliability, or the 30.06 Springfield round it fired. There's just one problem. It almost certainly never happened. And when you look at the actual evidence, surveys of the men who carried the rifle, accounts from German veterans who faced it, the physics of a battlefield, the physiology of combat, the myth unravels completely. But here is the deeper story, the one that gets overlooked. Even if the ping was never a death sentence, the story of why people believed it tells us something profound about war, fear, and the weight a soldier carries every time he picks up his rifle. Before we go any further, if you love real military history told straight, without shortcuts and without myth, subscribe to this channel right now and hit the bell. We go deep on the stories that actually matter, and this one matters a great deal. To understand the ping, you have to understand the rifle. The M1 Garand was the brainchild of a quiet, modest Canadian-born engineer named John Cantius Garand. He was born in 1888 just outside Montreal in a small Quebec town called Saint-Rémy. His family moved to Connecticut when he was a boy, and John, who anglicized his first name when he arrived in the United States, grew up working in textile mills, learning to forge, weld, and think mechanically from an early age. By 1919, John Garand was working at the United States Army's Springfield Armory in Massachusetts. He had been hired to do one thing: design a semi-automatic rifle that would give the American infantryman a decisive edge on the modern battlefield. It would take him over a decade. He cycled through prototypes. He tested primer-operated actions, gas-operated actions, rotating bolts. He competed against other designers, brilliant men like John Pedersen, who championed a different design and a different cartridge. The Army's Ordnance Board ran trial after trial through the late 1920s and into the 1930s. There were political fights, budget arguments, and bureaucratic dead ends. At one point, the Army nearly chose a rifle chambered for a smaller .276 caliber cartridge, a decision that would have changed everything. But in 1932, with vast stockpiles of .30-06 ammunition already in inventory, the Secretary of War ordered all work on the smaller caliber stopped. The Garand rifle, in the standard American .30 caliber, was the path forward. On January 9, 1936, the U.S. Army officially adopted the weapon. It was designated simply the U.S. Rifle, caliber .30 M1. John Garand, in an act of extraordinary patriotism, had ceded all rights to his design to the United States government. He received his regular salary as a government engineer, and not 1 cent in royalties. Over 5 million rifles would eventually be produced bearing his name. He died in 1974, famous and widely celebrated, but having never profited from one of the most significant military inventions of the 20th century. What made the Garand revolutionary was simple. It was the first standard-issue semi-automatic rifle in the world. Every major army of that era, German, Japanese, Italian, British, Soviet, was still issuing bolt-action rifles as their primary infantry weapon. A bolt-action rifle is an excellent weapon, accurate and dependable, but it requires the soldier to manually cycle the bolt after each shot. He fires, works the handle back and forward, chambers the next round, fires again. In the hands of a trained rifleman, a bolt action can put out perhaps 15 shots per minute in sustained fire. The M1 Garand fired as fast as a soldier could pull the trigger. With its gas-operated, rotating bolt system, the Garand recycled automatically after each shot. A trained GI could put 40 to 50 accurate rounds downrange per minute. He fired 8 shots without ever touching the action. Just aim, pull, again and again, the rifle working itself while he worked the enemy. The 8 rounds were loaded in a unique system called an en-bloc clip. Unlike a traditional detachable magazine, which stays with the rifle and is manually removed when empty, the en-bloc clip was inserted into the open action and became part of the feeding mechanism. It held 8 rounds of .30-06 ammunition, stacked in 2 columns of 4. When the last round fired, a spring inside the action snapped the empty clip upward and out of the receiver, with the bolt locking open behind it. And that ejection, that spring-driven launch of a thin metal clip striking the receiver walls and tumbling into the air, produced the sound. Ping. It's a genuinely distinctive sound. Not extremely loud, but sharp, metallic, unmistakable. Anyone who has ever fired an M1 Garand will tell you they never forget it. And to a generation of American soldiers, and their enemies, it became as closely associated with the rifle as the rifle itself. Production was slow at first. When the M1 was standardized in 1936, the Springfield Armory was producing just 10 rifles per day. By September 1939, when Germany invaded Poland and the world tilted toward war, production had reached only 100 per day. By January 1941, it was 600. By 1944, at peak production, Springfield Armory alone was completing nearly 4,000 rifles every single day of the month, 122,001 in the month of January 1944 alone. When Winchester Repeating Arms is added to the total, over 4 million M1 Garands were produced by the end of World War II. By D-Day, June 6, 1944, the M1 Garand was in the hands of essentially every American infantryman who came ashore at Normandy. And by that point, German soldiers on the other side of the hedgerows had already learned to respect what it could do. Now let us talk about the legend. The story of the Ping death sentence most likely evolved organically, the way many battlefield myths do. A soldier hears something, tells someone, the story grows in the retelling. By the time the war was over, the legend had taken a firm shape. Enemy soldiers, German and Japanese alike, were trained to listen for the M1's distinctive clip ejection sound. The moment they heard it, they charged. It is a compelling story. It has the structure of tragedy, a weapon so powerful that its very greatness carries within it a fatal flaw. The rifle that won the war also announced, in a metallic whisper, the moment its user was most vulnerable. The only problem is the evidence, or rather the almost total absence of it. Let us start with the most direct data point we have. In 1952, military researchers conducted a survey of veterans who had carried the M1 Garand in combat. They asked a straightforward question. What do you think of the Ping? Does it help the enemy or the shooter? 315 combat veterans responded. 85 men, about 27%, believed the Ping was helpful to the enemy. A tactical liability, just as the legend claimed. But 187 men, nearly 60%, said the Ping was actually more useful to them than to the enemy. It was a reliable, automatic signal to reload. In the chaos and sensory overload of combat, a clear auditory cue telling a soldier he had just fired his last round was genuinely valuable. Many veterans said they preferred it. The remaining soldiers were neutral or uncertain. Nearly 60% preferred to keep the Ping, even knowing the enemy might hear it. That survey result alone should give us serious pause about the myth. But there is more. Chief Warrant Officer 5 Charles D. Petrie, a U.S. Army officer, conducted interviews with German veterans of D-Day. He asked them directly, "Did you ever exploit the sound of the M1's clip ejection? Did you ever hear the Ping in charge an American position?" The German veterans reportedly found the question almost laughable. They said that in most engagements they simply could not hear the Ping at all. The battlefield was too loud. Rifles, machine guns, artillery, mortar fire, grenades, men shouting. The ping, however distinctive it sounds on a quiet firing range, was swallowed completely by the noise of real combat. And the rest of the time, even when they could theoretically hear it, they were far too aware of the other American riflemen in the squad to attempt a charge. Because here is the fundamental tactical reality the legend ignores. American soldiers did not fight alone. The M1 Garand was an individual weapon, but American infantry tactics were built around the squad. A standard U.S. Army rifle squad in World War II had between 10 and 12 men. If one soldier fired his last round and his Garand pinged, the men on either side of him still had full magazines. Charging a position because one of 12 rifles went empty would be suicidal. You would be rushing directly into the fire of 11 men who were still shooting. There is a second physiological reality the myth ignores as well: auditory exclusion. When a human being is in extreme danger, the brain undergoes a cascade of changes. Adrenaline floods the bloodstream, heart rate spikes, and something remarkable happens to hearing. The brain, flooded with stress hormones, begins to filter out sounds it judges to be non-threats. Soldiers in combat frequently report that they could not hear the gun in their own hands firing. They could not hear the man next to them shouting. Their entire auditory world narrowed to the immediate target in front of them. The idea that an enemy soldier, amid the roar of a firefight, his own brain locked in the tunnel vision of combat survival, would be calmly cataloging the distinct acoustic signature of an M1 Garand clip ejection, and would then choose to stand up and charge, requires us to believe something that virtually every study of human behavior in combat contradicts. And the reload itself? A trained American soldier could have a fresh clip in his M1 Garand in under 3 seconds. The en-bloc clip's design, the very same design that produced the ping, made reloading exceptionally fast. The shooter did not need to remove an empty magazine first. The empty clip ejected itself. He reached for a new clip, pressed it into the open action with his thumb, and the bolt slammed home. 3 seconds, maybe 4. That is not a window of vulnerability. That is barely the time it would take for an enemy to register what had happened, rise from cover, and cross open ground. So we have a sound largely inaudible over the noise of combat, describing a moment of vulnerability lasting 3 to 4 seconds, in a situation where dozens of other riflemen were still firing. The tactical window the myth describes, if it ever existed, was vanishingly small. Jonathan Ferguson, a senior researcher at Armament Research Services and a recognized authority on military small arms, examined this question in depth. His conclusion was direct. There is no verifiable historical evidence that the M1 Garand ping ever led to the death of an American soldier. The notion of it being a substantial risk is not supported by the record. But here is where the story becomes genuinely fascinating, because the myth is not just an error. It is a window into the psychology of combat and into something very human about the way soldiers think. The men who feared the ping were not foolish. They were not credulous or naive. Most of them were extraordinarily experienced, hardened by months or years of combat. When a veteran of Guadalcanal or Omaha Beach said he worried about the ping, that worry meant something real. What it reflected was not evidence that the ping caused deaths, but evidence of something deeper: the hypervigilance of the combat soldier. In a world where the snap of a twig can get you killed, where a cigarette lit in the dark can draw a sniper's bullet, where sound discipline can mean the difference between life and death, the idea that your rifle announces your moment of maximum vulnerability is terrifying. It doesn't have to have happened to be believed. It only has to feel possible. And in war, anything that feels possible is a threat. The 1952 survey makes this perfectly clear. 85 men believed the ping was dangerous, and these men were not wrong to be cautious. Their caution was a survival instinct, not a logical failure. But their caution was also, in the larger statistical picture, not borne out by what actually happened on the battlefield. There is even a fascinating counter-story, a piece of battlefield improvisation that reflects just how adaptable and psychologically sharp American soldiers really were. Some accounts suggest that certain GIs figured out a way to turn the ping into a weapon. The idea was simple. Take an empty en-bloc clip and throw it against a rock or your own helmet to simulate the sound. Then wait. If enemy soldiers heard the ping and believed it was real, if one of them stuck his head up to exploit what he thought was a moment of American weakness, he would find a soldier with a full magazine and a clear line of sight. Whether this was ever actually successful in combat is difficult to confirm. The chaos and noise that made the ping nearly inaudible to enemies would have made this trick largely unworkable in a firefight. But the fact that soldiers even conceived of it tells you something important. These men were not afraid of the ping. They were thinking about how to use it. Now step back and look at the broader picture. The M1 Garand went to war on every major front. It was at Guadalcanal when the Marines pushed the Japanese off a jungle island in some of the most brutal close-quarters fighting of the Pacific War. It was at Kasserine Pass in North Africa where American forces learned harsh lessons about German combined arms warfare and adapted. It was at Anzio in the grinding, bloody stalemate on the Italian peninsula. It was in the hands of the men who crossed Utah and Omaha and Gold and Sword and Juno on June 6, 1944. It was in the Hurtgen Forest and the Battle of the Bulge and the crossing of the Rhine. And it was at Iwo Jima and Okinawa, where American Marines fought through Japanese defenses of almost unimaginable tenacity. In all of those campaigns, across all of those theaters, the M1 Garand gave the American infantryman something his opponents fundamentally lacked: the ability to deliver continuous, accurate fire without cycling a bolt. A German soldier with his Karabiner 98K was a formidable opponent. The Kar 98K was perhaps the finest bolt-action rifle ever produced, accurate, reliable, powerful. But after each shot, the German soldier had to work the bolt. Hand back, bolt up, bolt back, round ejected, bolt forward, bolt down, hand back to trigger. His practical rate of fire was perhaps 15 rounds per minute in sustained combat. The American soldier with his Garand could fire 40 to 50 accurate rounds per minute. That asymmetry showed up on the battlefield in ways that were sometimes almost shocking. At a hillside in Tunisia called Jebel Tahent, a small American patrol and a German unit came face to face at barely 20 yards. When it was over, the German unit had been wiped out. The American semi-automatic fire had simply been overwhelming at close range. Japanese commanders in the Pacific, after their early encounters with Marine and Army units armed with the Garand, recognized clearly what they were up against. The Banzai charge, the mass infantry assault that had succeeded against slower-firing opponents, was devastatingly vulnerable to the high-volume fire of M1-equipped American units. Japanese tactical doctrine adapted. Banzai charges were increasingly forbidden because they were suicidal against American semi-automatic fire. On January 26, 1945, in a letter written on official Third Army letterhead to Major General Levin H. Campbell, Jr., the War Department's Chief of Ordnance, Lieutenant General George S. Patton, wrote one of the most famous sentences in American military history. "In my opinion, the M1 rifle is the greatest battle implement ever devised." Patton was not given to idle praise. He was a man who understood weapons as tools of killing, and he evaluated them with the cold precision of a professional warrior. His assessment of the M1 Garand was genuine, and it was shared in various formulations by soldiers and officers across the American military. The rifle had earned it. Not by being perfect. The Garand was heavy, over 9 pounds unloaded, and more when loaded and slung. In the jungles of the Pacific, where men humped miles through heat and mud, that weight was significant. The en-bloc clip system, for all its advantages, had one notable limitation. You could not top off the magazine. If you had fired 3 rounds from an 8-round clip, you could not add 3 more rounds to bring it back to full. You had to wait until the clip emptied, then reload with a full 8. And of course, there was the notoriously painful Garand thumb. What happened when a soldier loaded a clip carelessly and the bolt slammed home on his thumb? A moment of yelping, undignified agony known to virtually every GI who ever carried the weapon. But these were the complaints of men who still considered the M1 Garand one of the finest tools they had ever been given. The ping was never one of the real problems. It was a story soldiers told each other. In the dark, in the cold, in the quiet moments between the fighting, when fear has time to work on you and the mind reaches for dangers to name, because named dangers feel slightly more controllable than unnamed ones. The M1 Garand served through the Korean War as well, where it again performed with distinction in conditions ranging from sweltering summer heat to Arctic winter cold. By 1958, it was officially replaced as the standard U.S. service rifle by the M14, a weapon that owed enormous intellectual debt to the Garand and was in many ways a direct evolution of it. And even after that, surplus M1 Garands were distributed to American allies around the world: South Korea, Italy, Greece, West Germany, the Philippines, and dozens of other nations. Photographic evidence from 1986 shows Soviet troops in Afghanistan with captured Garands. An M1 Garand was recovered by Afghan police in 2013, 70 years after it was made, still functioning. John Garand's rifle had a reach and a longevity almost without parallel in the history of modern small arms. John Garand himself lived to see his legacy secure. He worked at Springfield Armory until his retirement in 1953. He received honors and recognition, including the Gold Medal for meritorious service. He never became wealthy from his invention. He died in 1974 at the age of 86. He had given his country a weapon that helped change the world and asked for nothing in return. The man himself was, in many ways, as quietly remarkable as the rifle he built. So what do we make of all this? The M1 Garand's ping was not a death sentence. The evidence is clear. Veterans who carried the rifle mostly found it useful rather than dangerous. German soldiers who faced it said they could barely hear it, and certainly wouldn't have charged at the sound of it. The tactical logic that supports the myth collapses when you examine it honestly. But here's what I want you to take away from this story, because there is something here that goes beyond the mechanical question of whether a sound endangered a soldier. The men who feared the ping were right to be afraid, not because the ping actually killed them, but because they were living inside a reality where fear was the correct response to almost everything, where every decision carried potentially lethal consequences, where a moment's inattention could mean a man never came home. They could not know that the ping was not dangerous. They could only know that danger was everywhere and that they had to account for all of it. That hypervigilance, that exhausting, grinding, total attentiveness to every possible threat is one of the most defining and least understood aspects of what combat soldiers carry. Not just the memories of what happened, but the memories of what could have happened. The thousand fears that never became real injuries, but were real fears nonetheless. The ping myth is, in some ways, a small monument to that burden, and the men who carried the M1 Garand, who fired it on the beaches and in the hedgerows and in the jungles and on the frozen ridgelines of Korea, they deserve to have their story told honestly. Not the myth, the truth. The truth is that they carried a magnificent rifle into the worst circumstances imaginable, and they used it with skill and courage and professionalism that changed the course of history. The ping didn't kill them. They survived it, along with everything else. 1 8-round clip at a time. General Patton was right. It was the greatest battle implement ever devised. And the men who carried it, they were something even greater. If this story meant something to you, if you believe real history deserves real telling, hit subscribe, leave a comment, and ring that bell. Every subscriber is a vote for history told without shortcuts. See you next time.